Welcome to another episode of Religion and Psychology with Jordan and Josh. I am one of your hosts, Mr. Jordan Blocker. With me is
Jordan.
Jordan. Yeah.
Wrong podcast. Wrong one. This is football.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Football!
Woo! Welcome back to another episode of Drafts with Jordan and Josh. I am one of your hosts, Mr. Jordan Blocker. With me, as always, the Biff to my McFly, Mr. Josh Liskowitz. How you doing, buddy?
Football!
Woohoo! I know, man. College football is here. Football is here. What are you doing? You were talking to me about a draft yard you're going to set up. What are you doing?
Yeah, I tell you, I'm all about those get-rich-quick schemes.
I love your strategies.
Oh, this is a doozy. You know, we've talked about it last couple weeks. This is the week to sign up, do your drafts with that app I've been talking about, Draft. So go to your app store, iPhone, Android, I don't care. Download Draft. Draft your team. Again, best ball leagues, so whatever you draft, that's your team for the entire year. The app will set your lineup every single week, so you just draft the players that you want on your team. That's your roster the entire year. You don't have to worry about injuries, don't have to worry about free agency trades, none of that stuff. You draft, you play for real money, and now's the week to do it. You know why, Jordan?
Why? See, this is the strategy part. Why, Josh?
This is the strategy part. I know, and this is like when the whale negotiates with the house at the casino. To play blackjack. You know, you got to tilt the house rules into your advantage, and this is how you do it.
Okay.
You're watching Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, Week 3 NFL games. That means you got starters going a lot longer than they do the rest of the preseason. Inevitably, there's going to be a star that gets hurt. It's, obviously we don't want it, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. When
that happens, that's when you enter one of the leagues on Draft, whether it's a $3 league, $10 league, $100 league, doesn't matter. Enter one because somebody is going to draft that player that got hurt that is probably going to be out, unfortunately, for a little while or maybe a long while, and you have just tilted the house advantage back into your favor because you've got one opponent that's going to have some problems because they weren't paying attention like you were.
Oh.
So download Drafts, play it, forget about it. Check it at the end of the year. See how you did. I bet you'll be in good shape if you play this week and are paying attention to those preseason games.
Sounds awesome, Josh. Yeah, I always love Josh's strategies. We talk strategy about things a lot offline, and he's always got some angle. So this sounds like a good angle, Josh. That sounds cool. All right, Josh, we're gonna get on to some of the prospects.
I watch way too much It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, so I always have that angle.
We're gonna. I've never seen a show. I've never seen an episode.
Oh my goodness! Oh, you gotta watch.
We're gonna talk about the prospects now. We've been doing every group. Well, all we have left, Josh, is the tight ends and the safeties. Do you want to talk about? We're gonna combine them both because we're getting so close, man. I mean, Colorado State, Oregon State's coming up. Yeah,
like you said, Thursday.
Man,
or not Thursday. That's Saturday. I'm sorry. Thursday NFL starts Saturday.
This is our last show before the first game, right? First college game? Okay.
Yep. So, first set of college games this weekend. I'm excited. We just got our schedules out. I get to grade USF. That's exciting. Nice. They got a potential Heisman Trophy candidate at quarterback that's going to put up a ton of stats through the air, through the ground. But anyways, we are going to look at safeties and tight ends, and those are both such unique groups, Jordan. Because the NFL is, in college as well, it's completely changing on how these positions are treated. Obviously, NFL, you have safeties. You want a free safety that can play center field, but so many of these guys are ending up in the box as basically undersized linebackers, as extra men in, on rundowns, passing downs in the box. There's so many different things that they're asking them to do that it's a really intriguing position to be evaluating at the college level. And then conversely, you look at the other side, and we'll get into a couple of prospects where some of them can, play in line, can block. A lot of them, you don't want them there at all. You want them in the slot. You want them outside, taking advantage of their size to create mismatches. It's all about matchups, the NFL is. So it's really intriguing. Both these positions in particular, probably my two favorite positions to evaluate, Jordan, if we're being honest.
Well, they're definitely interesting positions, especially, the safeties are changing, the tight ends. Actually, yeah, I guess you're right. It just is the changing nature of them both. Yep. Before I have you open up your draft guide, Josh, I just want to talk about the awesome draft guide that is a part of your PFF Elite or PFF Edge subscription. This thing is absolutely incredible. Let's say we have like an individual stat on at least like 2,200 players or something ridiculous like that. There's hundreds of profiles on players. There's hundreds of pages. It's just incredible. Again, like I said, a resource that has never existed in the history of the draft. So definitely get your subscription to PFF Edge or PFF Elite to get it. One of the ways that you can do that is through, we have a promotion through DraftKings and FanDuel that if you go to profootballfocus.com/FanDuel17 or profootballfocus.com/DraftKings17, you can, get, I think it's like a $10 deposit and then you get a free Edge subscription. Do you like how I said DraftKings? Like I did a really interesting inflection there with it. There's one more way.
Not interesting at all, but okay.
What? There is one more way they could win it, Josh. What's the other way they could win a PFF Edge subscription?
Sure.
Actually, no, a PFF Elite.
Elite, yeah. Let's not sell it short. Elite. Yeah, that is our product that is normally priced at $199. Correct?
Yep.
So, this is a heck of a deal, and we do have a winner this week, so I will announce that in just a minute here. But go to iTunes, leave us a review, give us 5 stars, tell us what you think about the podcast, tell us why you like it, leave us your email or your Twitter handle, and we will pick one winner this week, and you will win a free Elite subscription. And, like you said, obviously, I said for draft, this is the week for signing up for that because of potential injuries for week 3. But obviously, we're getting down to the very end when all your fantasy drafts are going to be hitting after this.
Sign up, people.
You have to. You absolutely have to have this product. If you are a serious fantasy player, in particular, if you are a serious DFS fantasy player, our DFS optimizer, that is now live and fully operational.
Like the Death Star.
Yeah, you knew exactly where I was going with that because you're wearing your Star Wars shirt today. Very good.
All right. So, Josh, go ahead and open up your PFF preseason draft guide.
Well, Jordan, I gotta give this winners.
Oh yeah, what's the winner?
We got to give a subscription away. The winner this week is the people's champ.
The people's
champ. The people's CHMP.
He didn't have room for the A, but he's still the people's champ.
It could be an I. I hope it's not an
No,
it could be an op. The people's chomp.
It could be. It could be into bagels. I hope it's not the people's chump. I think it's the people's champ.
What if it's the people's chizomp? And they just didn't have room.
I think it's the people's champ and they didn't have room. But congratulations. You are now the proud owner of PFF Elite. All right. So again, Josh, open up your PFF and all you listeners, unless you're driving. Open up your PFF preseason draft guides to page 130. And we're going to start off, Josh, at the top of our tight end group right now with Mark Andrews, a redshirt junior, I guess, from Oklahoma. Big, good. Already has that NFL size, and I mean like a NFL inline tight end size, 6'5", 250 around there. And we talked about it, and later in the show, we quote Dirk Cutter talking about tight ends as well. And there's not that many of these guys that are big enough to even or strong enough to play in the line and then also flex out. Now we haven't seen him we've seen that he has the size. We've seen some snaps where he's lined up in line, but for the most part, he's still been out in the slot, right?
Yeah. In fact, the first time I went to look him up, I couldn't find him listed among our tight ends. Obviously, he's there in the draft guide. But at our regular player grades, he's listed as a wide receiver because that's where probably 80-85% of his snaps came from, was somewhere out in the slot. So obviously part of that is usage out there. It doesn't mean he can't block. I think he's big enough to be able to do it. There's a lot of college tight ends now that are, in the 230 to 240 range. He's solidly in his 250s, and he looks like he has bulk to add even more to his frame. if the NFL seems fit. I really don't think I would want to do that. I'd want him to keep his athleticism. But, a guy that has played majority out in the slot, and when you consider all the weapons that have left Oklahoma this year, he's going to be the guy. So I would expect a hugely productive year from him. He's a guy that can definitely stretch the seams. He has a little bit of twist to his game. Boy, I love watching him run in the open field because he can really separate himself, not just from linebackers, but from safeties as well. We saw that on film quite a bit, didn't we, Jordan?
Yeah, and looking it up, Josh, it looks like 25 of his 31 receptions last year came out of the slot.
There you go.
Like you mentioned, he's going to be a big-time weapon for Baker Mayfield. Last year, again, he had 205 yards after the catch, so he definitely can provide that element to an offense. He had 7 touchdowns. He did have 6 drops, Josh. So
yeah, that is concerning.
That would be a concern. And then also,
and only 37 catchable balls, too, so that is a lot of drops on not that many targets. So that is definitely a concern.
He did have 12 deep pass receptions for 20 or more yards, which ranks 10th in the draft class. So that is impressive. But again, a lot to like about him. But there are things that we'd like to see improve. Again, the drops, and we'd like to see, and it's not necessarily his fault because it's his usage in the offense, but we'd like to see him used in a more traditional sense. Just because selfishly, it would help our evaluation and the NFL's evaluation.
Yeah, and one more point on the drops, too. One thing that we noticed throughout is that he would have trouble adjusting to some off-target passes as well. So those weren't necessarily classified as drops, but when you put those two together, that really suggests that he does not have natural hands. So hopefully that's what he's been working on this offseason, and we'll see significant improvements there because that obviously, tight end, he's got to be able to catch the ball, especially if he's considered a receiving tight end. So that's a major, major issue that he needs to clean up. All
right. Moving on to the next player, I don't know if I'm legally allowed to talk about him. I don't know if if the restraining order allows me to. I'm not sure. But it's South Dakota State's Dallas Goedert. And again, if you go all the way back to episode 1 of Drafts with Jordan and Josh, I mentioned him as my guy, Josh.
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely have. This is the guy that I like. Probably one of my favorite players for this draft. Really, really high on this player. I said my player comp for him, Josh, and I'm not backing down from this. Travis Kelce with Odell Beckham's ball skills.
That is so over the top.
That's my comp.
Wow.
Josh. That's my comp.
Does he run routes like Jerry Rice?
I haven't gone that far yet, but yes, I'm going Travis
I bet
Kelce
if you put him at quarterback, I bet if you put him at quarterback, he can throw the ball clear over the mountains just like Jeff George did.
He's again. Goddard's about around, what is he? I think he's like 6'4", 240 around there. High school basketball player. So he has that sort of basketball movement skills. But again, I think he's big enough, Josh, to play wide, to play inline, and to be used as a blocker at a point of attack. But it's really just a waste of his skill set. It's a guy that you'd want to be putting out in the slot or even flexing out wide and using in that capacity. I mean, we didn't get to see a whole lot of him last year because he didn't really play too many games against the FBS opponents. But man, he's been really impressive. From the times that I've got to watch him. Like I said, just incredible ball skills, incredible catching radius, just very impressive player. If you get a chance to see him, highly recommend it. What do you like about Goedert, Josh?
Obviously that your comps are just crazy pants, and I don't know, maybe that's the hot desert air or something. But that being said, there's not a lot about him not to like. Certainly you worry a little bit about the level of competition he's facing off against. We talked about throughout this summer how important the Senior Bowl is for guys like Goedert. So
it's going to be huge for him. Yeah.
Yeah. The biggest thing I want to see is I want to see him healthy enough to go compete at the Senior Bowl because I want to see him compete against the creme de la creme there and see how that works out. I have a pretty good feeling that he's going to do pretty well against that talent, especially when you consider, obviously we've already gone over linebackers. This isn't going to be a very impressive linebacker class. I imagine he'll eat those guys up pretty well, but I still want to see it. I want to see him against a better level competition.
Me too. I'd like to be sitting in my little spot up there at Lad Peebles, seeing him make some nice catches over the top of guys.
Up in the box. Yep.
Up
in the box, or
right. Usually
down on the field.
Yeah.
Although when I'm down on the field, like you said last week, I'm usually on top of the defensive lineman. So.
Yeah, I think I was sandwiched in between Andrew Siciliano and Chuck Pagano.
I was working on Pittsburgh this past week, and Danny McCullers, obviously, they still have. And that guy in particular is a guy that literally about ran me over. He was within inches of me in a pit drill one day. And for those of you that may not know Danny McCullers, who's just a backup now, he's 6'8", 350.
Biggest players to come out recently.
He's one of the single biggest players in the NFL, and he was within inches of ending my life. It was fun. It was like skydiving without a parachute.
That's why I hang out up in the press box.
That's smart.
All right, Josh, we got one more tight end we want to cover, and he comes from your conference. Why don't you take us through it?
He does, and I think I saw earlier today he was preseason AP All-American. He wasn't on ours. Our first teamer we already discussed. That's Andrews. It's Mike Gesicki from Penn State. First of all, I better say his name.
Yes.
Interesting player, and there's a number of things to like about him and a number of things to really not like. My comp to him is Eric Ebron. And really, it's kind of an all-encompassing thing. When you watch Eric Ebron, Ebron's probably a better all-around athlete, but Gesicki's got that stride. He's got some speed. Where he excels at is his ability to play the ball in the air. His size and athleticism, his ball skills. He's just such a tough matchup, linebacker, safety, corner, you name it. They really struggle with him, and Penn State loves to exploit that by giving him those 50-50 balls downfield and those back shoulder throws where he's able to use that frame, and he knows how to use it like a wide receiver. He does really well in that regard. The other unfortunate part of the comp to Eric Ebron is his blocking, and that's the biggest reason why you didn't find him on our all preseason all Big Ten list or all American list, is because it's not good. Now, they do similarly to Detroit. They love to do, well, Detroit doesn't do zone read, but they certainly do a lot of outside zone, as Penn State does. And you get a lot of the split blocks from those tight ends. And man, Gesicki it's not pretty watching them try a block. I don't know if it's an effort thing or he just can't get it down, but just seems to whiff constantly. And it reminds me so much of Eric Ebron in that regard, who has really struggled in that capacity. So when we talk about the changing face of what a tight end is, I think about a guy like Gesicki, and it's one of those things where he has to be used right. I don't know that blocking is ever going to be his thing, but that's okay if he's not asked to block a lot like Ebron has in Detroit, because that's been a big problem for them because they keep asking him to do something he's not really capable of doing. So that'll be something to watch this year to see if his blocking improves somewhat. If it doesn't, then you need to know going in, kind of like the Giants admitted with their first round pick this year, that, hey, he's basically a slot receiver for us, and that's kind of where Gesicki needs to be at the next level.
Yeah, there was, like you mentioned, he's got there's very particular set of skills as far as his ball tracking ability and, adjusting and being, strong at the catch point. I thought that he was a little bit, he's pretty gangly, and he's, to me, he doesn't look as fluid as the other two tight ends we just spoke about, but you can definitely see, how he could be used. And he really stands out, as you mentioned, adjusting the ball, and especially adjusting the ball downfield, Josh. He had 7 catches of 20 or more yards, which ranks in number 1 in the draft class. And then he had 301 yards on deep passes, which also ranks number 1 among tight ends in the draft class. So, NFL teams are going to see that and really try to figure out how to use that aspect of it, I imagine.
And the same thing with all 3 of the tight ends we've discussed. There's some major attrition I guess there isn't necessarily some at South Dakota State, but Goedert was already the sole feature of that offense. And the other 2, if they weren't considered that already, they're certainly going to be that this year because of attrition. So we're going to get to see a lot of Mike Gesicki with the ball being thrown to him. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to him building off of last year. We should see plenty of him and get a pretty good idea of what he is, at least as far as his receiving skill set and his running ability.
And there's also plenty of other good prospects out there, again, that fit, different roles. These are just some guys that we wanted to highlight. Again, the draft guide will have all those guys in there for you.
Yep. One guy I'll mention real quick that I was really super intrigued with, C.J. Conrad from Kentucky. I thought he looked like a top athlete, guy that, if I remember correctly, he wasn't really asked to. Was he the guy that wasn't asked to block a lot, or was he the guy that wasn't asked to run a lot of routes?
No, I think Conrad was a good blocker.
He was the blocker that wasn't asked to be a big part of the receiving game. I'm hoping to see more of that from him. But moving on from there, we've got safeties to talk about, sir.
All right, Josh, as you mentioned, it's time to move on to the safety position. This class it's not going to be as good as last year's class. I don't think last year's class was the best safety class I can ever recall.
Yeah.
But as far as top end talent, I think this year's is better because Derwin James, who we'll get into, is at the top end of this talent. I think he's a blue chip, top 5 player. We didn't really, we did have, Jamal Adams last year as our blue chipper, but to me, there wasn't a prospect like Derwin James. And then we have some other talented players, too, as well, that we're not necessarily going to hit on right away. Quinn Blanding from Virginia, Darius Pickett, UCLA, Marcus Allen, Penn State, Terrell Edmonds, Virginia Tech, 2 guys at Alabama, Ronnie Harrison and Hootie Jones. But we're gonna start off with Derwin James, Josh, and then we want to hit some other guys who we thought were kind of interesting, and then we'll move on to our inside the war rooms. But we're gonna start off, Josh. Like I said, we when we did the tight ends, we did my first guy, which was Dallas Goedert, and we're also now doing your first guy, which was Derwin James.
Yeah, obviously Derwin James. Talked about on a number of different podcasts and I did some radio this week. I think I mentioned him as well. He comes back to his form he was as a freshman. He's the top defensive player in the draft, and really he's probably the top all-around player in the draft, aside from quarterbacks, just because of the value of a quarterback. Mm-hmm. He's just that good. It's spectacular to watch his film from his freshman year 2 years ago, when he just physically, athletically, at Florida State had a top 5 defensive back playing that year. They had one. So it's not like, even his own team had guys that high. And he physically, athletically just looked like a man amongst boys. I don't want to compare because this is my own absurd comparison. But like when you watch Clowney clips from high school, like maybe it wasn't quite that level, but still at the same time, you watch Clowney in high school and it's like, it's not fair. This man is just manhandling these little kids. And from the perspective of what a safety can do, and in terms of running, hitting, and showing up in all phases of his game, that was Derwin James to an extent as a freshman. So, I mean, if he can get back to that form athletically, with his side, with his speed, with his ability to rush the passer, certainly coverage as well. I mean, there's not a thing on the football field that he cannot do. He's really just a slightly undersized linebacker that can do everything, with the added benefit of being a safety, and you can put in the slot as probably a corner too. So, I mean, like, he does everything for you.
Yeah, he's ridiculous. And his profile that we're looking at here is on page 416 in the draft guide. Yes, 416. So
that's probably his 40 time 4.16.
As you mentioned, Josh, his freshman year. I mean, looking at his grades in the guide, his freshman year is ridiculous. He finishes the nation's top graded safety at 91 overall. He ranked again, he's the nation's top graded safety. With all those safeties we had this year, we just said that's the best safety class ever. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, and he was
all
better
those
than all
safeties.
Of them, yeah.
He was better than all of them.
So that's a very good point. He ranked 4th against the run, 84.7 grade. He second as a pass rusher, 78.0 grade, and then 30th in coverage at 81.4. So
second in tackling efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a prospect like him, Josh, that I thought was basically someone who could be an elite playmaker on all 3 levels of a defense.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous, because he can edge rush, Josh. You've seen it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's legit. I would do lots of edge rushing with him, because ultimately yes, you want a back 7 guy to cover. That's what you want to do most. But edge rushers, those are the guys that make the most money, because that's the most important thing to be able to do, is to be able to get to the quarterback. And certainly while he's trying to learn a variety of things in a variety of roles, just letting him put his hand on the ground or blitz, I mean, that's going to be the most naturally instinctive thing for him to be able to do immediately at the next level. Certainly was Florida State's thinking. That's why they had him doing it so much. I would imagine we probably don't see quite as much edge rushing from him this year, just because he's going to have a lot more responsibilities on the back end. But as a rookie, yeah, I'm rushing him off the edge. There's no question about that.
It's just scary to again see a guy who's a safety, but when you watch him on film, you could see NFL edge rush ability. And then when he's on the second level, you could see NFL tackling, NFL run stopping ability, NFL linebacker coverage ability. And then you move him back to the third level and you see, NFL safety ability. So again, don't think I've ever seen a defensive prospect quite like him.
Yeah.
And I agree with your assessment. I think he would be the first non-quarterback taken.
Yeah, he should be. And because of his diverse skill set, I like to say that he is perfect insurance. Because maybe we don't have his exact role defined. Maybe his role is going to be a little bit of everything. But that's the point, is that at the next level, you take him top 5, assuming you don't need a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And he's going to succeed in some capacity and play at a very high level at some capacity, because everything he does, and we just named 10 different things that he does extremely well, he does at a very high level. So at the next level, I fully anticipate him figuring at least one thing out. So it's not one of those guys like Jabril Peppers this year. Obviously, he ended up going in the back end of the first round, and actually he's looked pretty good so far, and he played mostly at safety this past weekend, which was interesting. But outside of him on special teams, you don't really know what you're getting with him on defense, and where he really fits doesn't really have a natural position or role at the NFL on the defensive side of the ball. That was a big concern in him coming through. So you don't really know what you're getting from him in any one area. I think, well, that can be said with Derwin. It's mostly because he does so much, you're not really sure where to focus him in on. But he does everything at such a higher level than anybody. He's going to succeed somewhere, if not everywhere.
So you're saying he's almost like, because his versatility, he's almost like insurance if, you get short at linebacker or short at safety or short at edge rusher. It's like he can go play some other stuff. Yeah, it's really not normal to see someone like him. So, hopefully he's fully healthy and operational, like the Death Star this year. Because, he's a lot of fun to watch.
He's a true unicorn.
All right, moving on, Josh, back to the Big Ten, and some beautiful new football facilities I saw there at Northwestern. Safety Godwin Igwebuike. You watched him last year a lot.
I did. He's an interesting guy, and Northwestern has a bunch of defensive prospects, including another safety. But Godwin Igwebuike is I would call the leader of that defense, and certainly the highest profile guy. He's a little over 6 foot, 205. He looks every bit that. He's well built. I like him a lot in the box in terms of his ability to hit and tackle and play the run. He does all that well. I think he can do a good job against tight ends and backs, especially when he's pressing up in the box. Where I do have a little concern is on the back end. Don't really want him at free safety. He's not a guy that's real quick twitch. You look at him change directions, there's a little bit of stiffness, and he really struggles to close the gap. There are a number of situations where he was in off coverage, where he'd line up 7-8 yards off the line of scrimmage in man, and he really struggled to close that gap and transition out of the break. And so he would give up completions that way. So I don't think you want him working in that capacity, so he's not a complete guy. I will see how he tests next February, March, I think he'll be plenty good enough for the NFL, but I don't think he's going to be a super elite athlete. I think that's kind of what shows on film. But that being said, I think there's a clear role for him because he's good in the box and he does a number of things in that capacity at a very, very high capacity.
And he went to Northwestern, which means he's smart.
Oh, of course. Automatically has to be smart, right?
Yes. We know that. Our listeners know that now. Automatically smart for Godwin there. But, yeah, I mean, he's there's some GMs, and this was I'm sure it's still, prevalent, but I know it was a real big thing back with Parcells or Holmgren or things like that. They used to like guys who had a lot of playing experience in college. Mm-hmm. And he's got a lot of playing experience, Josh. 2,327 career snaps. So that's really going to stand out to somebody. They're really going to, some NFL
probably another 1,000 this year if he's healthy. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then we're talking so far, in his 3 years, he's got, looks like 15 plays on the ball, 10 passes broken up and 5 interceptions. So, all those things are going to factor in, again, a whole year for him to, add to that. But yeah, I think NFL teams are really going to like him.
Yeah, and also worth pointing out, I did mention some of the issues I do have with him in coverage. You have to use him a specific way. All that being said, he's been targeted 112 times in 3 seasons, has given up 2 total touchdowns into his coverage. So that to me is pretty impressive as well, because that is particularly an area with safeties where, especially if a guy's down in the box, he's going to end up isolated on some of those slot guys, some tight ends, and he's holding his own down there in the red zone.
All right, the next player we want to talk about is Utah safety Chase Hansen. He is he was part of a really, really talented safety tandem last year for the Utes. Marcus Williams, who ended up drafted by the Saints, was that the second round he go? I think.
Yes.
But they played very, very, and not to get too technical, they played a very, very cover 3 heavy type of scheme where your outside corners and your center fielding safety are sort of playing a 3 deep shell. And so Marcus Williams was always that center fielder. Well, Chase Hansen was always one of the 4 under coverage guys usually. I'm not saying always. Sometimes he was back, but he was usually more in the box playing on that second level. I think he played 91.6% of his snaps in the box, Josh, which was 9th highest in the nation, which kind of makes his evaluation interesting, and especially how we project him, don't you think?
It does, but it's fun watching him because he's so big. Well, we listed him as 6'3", 220 in the guide. Yeah. And he's every bit that. He looks like a linebacker. And I think he can play a linebacker too. So you think about what the NFL has done. We mentioned at the top of the show the diversity of skill sets and different things that the NFL is looking for at linebackers, bringing these guys into the box. That's Chase Hansen. I could totally see NFL looking at him, especially when you consider we went over linebackers just recently in another podcast, obviously, one of the previous episodes, and talked about how weak the off-ball linebacker class is. Chase Hansen could be up toward the top of that with his skill set because he really intrigues me in terms of his combination of athleticism and size. I think it bodes really well for his ability to be a base 4-3 outside linebacker as well as a strong safety.
I mean, his build now, like we said, he's 220 pounds. So, 10, 15 years ago, that would have been an ideal strong safety, which is normally plays. But now, that's like a sub-package linebacker. So
yeah, and it looks like he has the frame where you can add a bunch of weight on him quickly. So if you said, yes, that's exactly where we want him, we just want him playing linebacker, right? I think he's going to be able to bulk up and put another 15 pounds on it and be a nice big guy there.
Because, if we look at just his height, weight, he's already bigger than Dayon Buchanan, who made that transition for the Cardinals. So, not, Josh and I don't know that that's how NFL teams are going to view him, but I imagine there's going to be some who are really going to look at him that way. And that, I think, would really improve and impact his value. Like you said, if they can view him as, okay, well, on second, this guy's going to be our sub-package linebacker and he's never going to come off the field and he's just going to be, one of our inside backers or maybe even outside backer. But again, as a safety, he's been pretty impressive. He led all safeties of the pass rush productivity, again, which, would sort of lend to him playing more in the box. He had 2 sacks, 6 hits, and 6 hurries on 41 rushes. And then he also broke up 2 passes and intercepted 3 more in coverage last year, Josh. So yeah, I mean, again, he doesn't have Marcus Williams there anymore, so that's going to be interesting to see. What do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is as much as you look at him, you think, okay, he's in the box slot. That's where he plays. You can put him as a linebacker against the run. At least statistically, he was much better as a pass defender than he was as a run stopper. Tackling, that's certainly a concern. Missed 17 tackles on 100 attempts last year. That's not very good, and that needs to get fixed. And so that's something obviously we're going to have our eye closely on this year. But you mentioned some of his coverage stats: no touchdowns allowed, 3 picks, 2 passes defended. How about the fact that on throws into his coverage, and obviously it's a little bit different when you're a safety because your alignment's a little bit different than it is as a corner, but throws into his coverage, QB's had a rating of 34.0 on throws into his coverage. That's number 1 among all returning safeties. That is very impressive. And so I want to see if that continues, if he improves that tackling. If he can do both those things, then I think it's one of those issues where you're going to get some NFL teams that are going to want to put him at linebacker maybe because of the size, because of his abilities there, and you're going to get some that want to keep him back as a safety as well. So I think he's going to have appeal to all teams because of his diversity in terms of his size and his skill set.
Yeah, I agreed. It is going to be really interesting to see. I know he's our highest graded returning player on his team. As we mentioned, there's a lot to like about him, but I've also heard from a friend of the show, ESPN's Bill Riley in Salt Lake City, that the safety group there behind Hansen is deep. And so he said, don't be surprised if you see maybe Hansen doing some hybrid stuff and there being 2 other safeties on the field. So yeah. I mean, if that happens, which would be awesome, that would really, I guess, sort of help that evaluation, don't you think?
Oh, no question about that. Yeah, especially if we're talking about him transitioning. Obviously, Utah has put some guys on their defenses in the NFL as of late. They've had some real solid defenses. They know what they're doing there. They have some other guys there. We talked about Lotulelei up front. Hopefully we get a little more out of him this year. But Chase Hansen looks like the best player on what's normally a very good defense.
All right, Josh, it's time to go inside the war room. We are still in the South. We are going to start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's either we go inside the war room or I just start singing Total Eclipse of My Heart because of that eclipse that's coming up.
I think we should go inside the war room.
I think you're just saying that selfishly because the Tony Awards that we won have been for your singing up to this point and you don't want to share.
You can't touch my voice. My voice is velvet, at least compared to yours.
I know. This is true because I've heard you sing Queensryche. So let's go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Jason Light's the GM. I believe was this his third? I think this is his 3rd draft there, right?
That sounds about right, yeah. Yeah, because he was there the year before we came to PFF, I want to say. So that would make 3.
Yeah, I think so. I was in the stands with him at Lad Peebles when he got that job. So it couldn't have been that long ago.
Yes, you were the reason he got that job.
Well, I don't think I was the reason. I was just there when I got to be one of the first people to say congrats to him, but I wasn't the reason, I don't think.
So you were that annoying fanboy is what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, Jason's a good guy, though. I like Jason. So anyways, he got there. I think he was wasn't he sort of like Lovey's handpicked guy, and then Lovey was gone after a year, so that was interesting. But Jason's a good...
Yeah, because Lovey was picked first. Lovey was hired first, so
so that was
kind of backwards.
That was an odd situation. But yeah, Jason was again, long history of being a very good evaluator. I think he's doing a really good job at being down there. And I'm not just saying that from my fanboy perspective, Josh. And then so their thing there, in the Bucs front office there is they're trying to pick players where they say where need and value meet. And they build their board, and they have a pretty specific limit here to their board. They have a top 120 board as their final board, which Josh just loves this. Josh is glaring at me right now. Why
I am.
Why do you not like the 120 board, Josh?
Oh, I don't get that because every year is completely different. There might be years where there are 30 guys that you think are worth drafting. And then there might be years where there are 150 guys you'd be okay. I just don't understand the general capping at a number every season. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. I think you have to take every year as it comes. I'm okay if you like to have a big board. I'm okay if you like to have a small board, but capping either way, that just doesn't make sense to me.
You are a historically and notoriously difficult evaluator to please. So I imagine if you had your way, some days you might have like a 4-person draft board.
I remember, oh gosh, was it 2013 or 2014? I think I had 8 or 9 first-round grades. So yes, that is not fake news. I am notoriously a difficult grader, at least at the top of the draft.
So the Bucs wanted to add some explosive players. So I imagine there were some explosive players in their top 120. They said that, like Jason Light said, that speed is one thing they felt like that we needed to add, and they felt like they did that with some of their picks. But it was like Jason Light said it was something that during a meeting during the year with Dirk Cutter, he decided that like he wrote it on a whiteboard. Like he said, we need to add speed. So like that was something they were really looking for as far as helping the team. And then they also wanted to add physicality on defense, and I think they did that too with some of their picks. So, sure. I think they kind of really, it sounds like they really accomplished what they were trying to accomplish. And then going into their picks, Josh, the first pick they took was O.J. Howard, the tight end from Alabama, who was pretty much the consensus top tight end in the draft, and someone they really, really liked, someone who they thought about trading up for, but they didn't. But it's another Alabama guy, Josh.
Yeah, it is. And they did make mention of how they value Alabama guys just because they're schooled, they're ready to go. And certainly Howard is in that, especially Howard, just because he's a tight end, but he's from a pro-style system. He can both block and receive. Again, coming from under center, there's just a lot of pro things that he's already done at a very high level at Alabama, and he'll be able to translate that pretty quickly. That was a pretty big point of emphasis for them, and it makes a lot of sense. I think I also tend to agree with them that they didn't expect him to be there at number 19. I don't think any of us did, and they felt it was quarterbacks that pushed him down. And really, you could argue just the rest of the offensive skill players going that high, that probably pushed him down as well. Yeah. Quite frankly, I'm still surprised he wasn't in that mix of offensive skill players, but
so were they.
That was such a weird way the draft panned out because the top 10 had basically all, excluding Howard, all of the top offensive skill guys, and then it went defense heavy after that. It was just kind of the draft writing itself at that point with the mid-20s. I mean, obviously, you in particular, you have a guy in Derek Barnett from Philadelphia. Obviously, we talked about him a couple of weeks ago, how we loved him, and he's now absolutely destroying it for Philly in preseason. But a guy like that was probably number 2 or 3 overall on our draft board. Fell to the middle of the first round, just a couple picks. What was it, number 14? Just a couple picks before.
I think so.
Howard went to Tampa. So, I mean, it was just weird the way the board went early, and obviously it really panned out for Tampa here.
Yeah, it definitely did, and like you said, they thought that some of those offensive skill players pushed him down, and they agree with you, Josh. They thought that he should have been gone long before 19. I mean, they both Cutter and Light looked like the Cheshire Cat during these pressers. I mean, they could not stop smiling after they drafted O.J. Howard. I mean, just ridiculous. When you talk about like on the field, they feel like he's really going to open things up because he's a good blocker, so that's going to help in the run game. And then he's going to be sort of, a target in the middle of the field. It's going to help the outside guys. So they're really excited about it. And then, Dirk Cutter says like there just aren't a lot of guys out there anymore who can both run down the seam and block a defensive end at the line of scrimmage. And OJ is a guy who can do that. So again, he's going to make a really big impact for them on the field, Josh, and they're really excited.
Yeah, one of the most encouraging things that they said this offseason about him is the fact that they talked about in their offense, a lot of offenses in general today, if you have 2 tight ends, 1 Y, 1 F, you can really establish and dictate what you're doing, run or pass. So that tells me that they are indeed going to have him and Cameron Brate on the field at the same time, because Brate was a hell of a playmaker down the stretch for them. He was their most consistent guy. So that should be very encouraging to Bucs fans, that they're making it very clear, hey, we're going to put both of them on the field. Certainly New England's kind of the first of the modern day teams to really employ that, when they had obviously Aaron Hernandez and Gronkowski in their heyday, I guess. But I think they have a real opportunity to be able to do something similar, not to compare those two players to the two guys in New England, but that should be one of the strengths of the offense. Obviously, they have Mike Evans, but having those two tight ends and the versatility to do a number of different things, I think they have to exploit.
Yeah, and they said that they talked to Brate after they took Howard and let him know that he's still, a valued weapon. And they view him that way, like you said, but they just sort of view Howard as a legit Y tight end, and those are hard to find, and then they view Brate as the F. Yeah. And so, they basically sound like they're going to be in 12 personnel on first and second down, essentially this year. So expect a lot of two tight end sets from Tampa.
Yeah, and Detroit did something similar too. Obviously, they didn't take a tight end in the first round this time, but they already have Ebron in the fold there. And then they took Michael Roberts late, who's another guy that can line up in line, can block. They also took some guys in free agency, can do something similar, which, like Brate in Tampa, will allow Ebron to kind of split out and do what he does best in terms of create mismatches outside from the slot, from outside. And so I think while initially in both cases for Brate and Ebron, it may look like, they might be getting pushed out a little bit, I think it's actually going to work to their advantage in both situations.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like this is really going to help open up their offense a little bit. Which sounds weird because we're talking about putting an inline tight end to help open up your offense, but it definitely sounds like it's going to do that. And then when you factor in the off the field with this kid, Josh, they could not stop smiling. They just said he's one of the top character kids on the board, if not the top. So they view him. They said they don't view him as a culture fit. They view him as someone who can come in and help improve the culture. That's just the type of caliber of kid that he is. So they're really, really, really excited about him.
Yeah, you can't ask for much more than that. And obviously there were a number of other guys from Alabama that may not have had the most squeaky clean images, but certainly Howard, they thought differently of him. So good for them for being able to really luck into a guy like that at such a late stage in the first round. I just think he's going to be awesome for them. I don't know what kind of production he'll have initially. Obviously, that's going to be split a little bit, but in terms of our grading for him, I bet you he's pretty good pretty quickly, just because he can do so much at such a high level.
Yeah, and again, just a multi-skilled player. All right, their next pick, they took Justin Evans, safety.
My boy.
Big hitter. They like that, tough guy. They had him in for a facility visit and workout and met with him at the combine as well. They were really all over this guy. What do you like about him, Josh? Why do you think they factored him in that high?
I like everything but his tackling. I like the fact that it's not often that you see a safety, or any position for that matter, but certainly safety, where they mention big hitter, toughness, and can play center field all in the same respect. Mm-hmm. So you just don't get that kind of versatility that often. And his range and instincts, and they talked about him playing with anticipation out there in coverage, which I think is very apparent on film. All that is at such a high level that you can overlook the 500 missed tackles he had in 501 attempts. I
don't think those numbers are accurate, Josh.
They're not accurate, but it wasn't good at times.
I hear you.
It wasn't good. I don't know if I got a chance to say it. Probably not on this podcast, but for anyone that's seen the movie Interstellar, I likened him to Tars in the aspect in the beginning of Interstellar, when you first meet Tars, he's this very sarcastic robot that's flying this mission to outer space and kind of sarcastically throws out that he could have the crew killed at any point in time. He's not serious, but that's certainly always a worry when you're a human in space being controlled by a robot flying your ship. So Matthew McConaughey's character asks him if he has a humor setting, and he says yes, it's turned to 100%, and he asks him to turn it down to 75 or 80%. And to me, that's Justin Evans on the field. He has the explosive kill percentage marked to 100 on every single play, and sometimes he just needs to tear it down just a little bit of a notch, just because he tends to overrun plays and just go a little too crazy at times. But I mean, you have to like his intensity again, his range, his intelligence and coverage. I think is just outstanding, and when you put all that together, I think he has a chance to be a big time safety in this league.
Yeah, they agree, and someone had mentioned the sort of over aggressiveness of Evans in the presser, and Light basically sort of gave that classic line of I'd rather have the guy that is too aggressive than a guy that's not aggressive enough, or that
and they've shown that with the linebackers they've drafted as well. So that really shouldn't be a surprise that he ended up in Tampa, because Tampa and Atlanta, they've both shown that kind of philosophy with some of their back seven defenders that, hey, we want guys that are just aggressive and athletic, and we'll deal with the bad that comes with that good.
All right, next they took Chris Godwin, wide receiver from Penn State. Again, they were trying to add some speed to their team, so they added some speed. This guy, Josh, he really, I don't really like him personally because he tore it up against, my Pac-12 team USC in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. Rewatching that game, I thought there were a lot of route running by him in that game. That was a little bit less to be desired. I mean, certainly he had a lot of big grabs and put up a lot of big plays for Penn State in that game. But I wasn't fully convinced on him at that game, and I'm also not fully convinced that he showed the kind of speed and athleticism on film that he did at the Combine. So we'll see how that goes. But that being said, he's certainly a guy that can go up and get the ball. And when you have a quarterback like they have, when you have an ex-wide receiver in Mike Evans like they have, having a second guy that can do similar things that is very consistently going to see single coverage on the other side, that is pretty exciting. I think your point about USC, though, that's something worth looking at, because that was another point that they had made that we didn't touch on about Howard in terms of him playing his best in big games. Now, Howard, it seemed Clemson would just leave uncovered in the national title game in both years. But the point remains that when you have guys that are in huge situations and come up big, like both Godwin and Howard did, that tends to translate well in the eyes of the NFL.
Yeah, that's definitely something that they like. And then again, as you mentioned, his single coverage that he's going to see, he's really shown the ability to sort of be strong at the catch point and win those contested catches. And Jameis is always willing to, fit a ball in there and give those guys a chance to go do it. So I think he's got the chance to produce there. All right. Next they took, Kendall Beckwith, linebacker, LSU, and Drink for another LSU linebacker going into the NFC South. Unless you're driving, then don't drink. Wait till you get home and then drink. So Kendall Beckwith, linebacker, I don't know how often people actually use a Sam anymore. But they feel that he can compete for the starting Sam position. He has the ability to play Mike, but they said that basically he's not competing with Alexander or David. He's only there to play that Sam spot. So, they traded up for him, Josh. I think he's sort of physical. Again, they said in the beginning of this segment they wanted to add physicality on defense. Mm-hmm. And he's a little nicked up. They got to be patient with his injury. But again, I don't know. It just seems sort of strange that they just keep going back to the LSU linebacker thing. But I guess, they did get some inside info from Alexander.
They certainly did. I think it's interesting you bring up the point that Sam is a bit of a dying breed in the NFL. There's not as much with that. Basically, you're going to see Sams mostly in heavy sets and in goal line, short yardage situations. That's when you're going to bring the extra linebacker in, as opposed to the safety hybrid player that comes down in the box now. But the reality is, we weren't that high on Kendall Beckwith, but when he was at his best was in exactly those situations. Was in the goal line and in short yardage when he was aggressive and physical at the line of scrimmage. He showed the ability to defeat blocks and just get in the backfield and really blow short yardage plays up. He just seemed to have a knack for that. So it's one of those things where I don't know that you want a guy that's that specialized, but certainly with his ability to do that, that brings an element of dimension to their linebacking core that they don't necessarily have because the other guys they have are small speed guys. So having a guy that can kind of thump in tough situations, I think that was important for them to find. So hopefully for their sake, it pans out and they are able to use him in that capacity as he was used in LSU.
And Jason Light said Quan Alexander was very excited. He said he was on cloud nine. He said he sent me a text message with a picture of a goat. I wouldn't go that far, which I thought was pretty funny. So, so Quan's excited. They're, again, a bunch of LSU linebackers in that conference now. But, like Kendall Beckwith, called defenses at LSU, so that factors into it too. So, again, they need to be patient with him with his injury. But like you said, Josh, I think it's kind of, it adds a dimension that they didn't really have.
Right. I think that's an interesting point that Quan was so excited about that. Obviously, they're teammates, and there's generally going to be an element of that. But as much as we hear about those, you don't hear about the ones where they don't necessarily recommend the player from their team. And those certainly do exist.
Oh, I'm
so
sure,
I think it's totally fair of them to be relying on a guy like Quan, a veteran that they trust to do that. Not to do another Detroit reference, but obviously Detroit's first two picks were from University of Florida. And Davis, their linebacker, certainly they went to him about Tease Tabor, asking how he was, especially considering, they, as much as Quan is already an established leader of the Bucs defense, that's the intention of Davis as the Mike linebacker for Detroit. So it makes sense to lean on those guys for intel like that. That's some of the most important information you can get on a guy besides what he's doing on the field, because you just don't necessarily know how they're going to act once they get to the NFL and they got a big contract and they're, maybe they're away from home or just away from their normal group. They never really had a job before. So if you get intel like that from someone who's been around them 24/7, I think that's really, really valuable.
I agree. That's, and I think that goes back to why these, NFL decision makers like to, a lot of times they'll go back to the same schools, because they have, relationships with those coaches and they trust what they say and they trust what they're asking these players to do. But yeah, I agree that human intel is a big factor. All right. So the next player they took going out to the West was Jeremy McNichols, running back, from Boise State. He's a really interesting player, Josh. I mean, they called him the McWeapon at Boise State for a while. That was his nickname because they didn't really know where to put him. They would be running back and receiver. He started his career at wide receiver, but again, very, very specific Liam Neeson set of skills here with McNichols.
Yeah, and they've shown in the past with their backs, Sims in particular, that they really like using backs as receiving weapons out of the backfield. That's something they really value. And it's something they talked about with McNichols. Light said he had rare hands, one of the best pass protectors as well in the draft from that position. And obviously that's critical. But I mean, I feel like a broken record because I say this seemingly every week. But when you are a running back taken on day 3, you better be able to play on third down. And that appears to be, by the verbiage they've used with him, exclusively why they took him, because of his ability to play on third down. So, and I think, again, when you have a quarterback like Jameis Winston, he's a guy obviously who likes to take his chances downfield. It's good for him to have the security blankets, not just the tight ends, but also the back out of the backfield, that when things get rough, he knows, hey, instead of forcing that seam route, I can just dump it off to my back and he's going to get me that first down.
Yeah, and it sounds like, again, like you said, from the way they're talking about him, it sounds like he should see some third down snaps pretty early, in the season. Because, again, they already view him as being a solid pass protector and having great hands. And those are basically, the two boxes you need to check to be on the third field on third downs.
Yeah.
All right, their last pick, again, trying to go back to the well of being big and physical on defense, they took Stevie Tuikolovatu, a nose tackle from the Pac-12, played most of his college ball at Utah and then transferred to USC to play one season of ball at USC as a grad transfer. And he was like basically instantly the best defensive lineman at USC when he got there. But again, a very specific set of skills with Stevie T, right, Josh?
Yeah, where I want to go with him is right back to that bowl game, that Rose Bowl. He was my favorite player to watch in that bowl game, Jordan. And the reason is this. Looking in depth at the offensive line, defensive line play, he was intentionally slipping his gap fits to bait runners back into him, and then he would just literally toss his guy aside, either back into the runner, which happened several times, or to get back into the gap to make the play at the line of scrimmage. He was an absolutely dominant force in that game, and just really showed that, while he might not ever be the pass rush threat, and looking at him so far in preseason, I think we can safely say at least this year he's not going to offer much in that capacity. And of course, that's why he was drafted so late. But in terms of being a two-down run defender, I think he has a chance to be one of the better guys in the league because he is so physically dominant at the point of attack.
Yeah, and then, again, when you're talking about a late-round pick like this, this is when you take these guys who have this sort of limited skill sets, but are talented in that one particular skill. And like you said, he's a really talented run stopper and could be a first and second down player or a low red zone type player. Good luck trying to move him out of the way in low red zone.
Yeah. So we talked about with Tampa, 6 picks? 6 picks here, which isn't a lot, obviously, but think about what we've discussed with him. So you've got O.J. Howard. He's a diverse guy, has a number of different things he can do, and he makes players on your team better. Obviously, he helps Braid out in particular a ton.
Okay, Josh, it is now time to go inside the war room of the Tennessee Titans. They have John Robinson is the GM there now. This is his second draft. He did not draft Marcus Mariota. But I think you and I both think that was the right pick there and a good pick. So it's not like he came into a bad situation. But I just think that it's important to note that he did not draft Mariota. But since he got there, Josh, he's been trying to build around Mariota, which is the smart thing to do.
Oh, you have to do that. And then one note I'll say on that, I don't know what kind of other options John Robinson had, but it was certainly a situation where when you're a GM, optimally you want to go to a place that has a quarterback, or is it going to be a position that you're to draft a franchise quarterback, and that had to be a situation that he viewed going in as positive because of what we think Mariota is now and what he can become. But certainly one of the things you want to do is when you have a young quarterback, we talked about this with the Rams, you want to put people around him, and they have completely rehauled the skill positions on offense the last 2 years, in particular the wide receiver core and tight ends this year. They've added to really both of those cores. Obviously, with their first overall pick this year, we'll get to that. But they seem to have you have like a specific skill you want each of your different skill players to do. They have at least one guy that does every little thing. So it's a diverse array of talent that they've surrounded Mariota with, and should be a really fun team to watch going forward.
I agree. I mean, I have to honestly think that they're got to be in AFC title contenders going forward. I think if it doesn't necessarily happen this year, I think that it's right around the corner, just because of the way that they've been building. And then we look about it now in the pieces that you mentioned. He's got basically two first-round tackles now. He's got a second-round running back to go with the free agent running back. We've got a top 5 wide receiver now, as we'll get to. So that's a lot that they've thrown around him to help him and his success. So, and he's been solid thus far. So I really think that this would be a good year for him to take the next step.
Yeah, and you think about again your comment about them competing for AFC championships going forward. Obviously, that's a bold statement, but just you think within the division, while it seems on the upswing, you look at all the other teams. Houston, they have a stacked defense, but man, do they have issues at quarterback right now. We don't know what we're going to get out of Deshaun Watson. I mean, he's still an unknown. You and I, we didn't really like his accuracy. We'll see if they get enough out of him going forward. Maybe not this year, but in the future. but there's some questions there. Jacksonville, they have a lot of pieces on defense. Still have a lot of questions on offensive line and quarterback situations, just an absolute disaster right now. So I think that really hurts them. Then you look at Indy. They have quarterback, they have wide receiver, and it's a mess just about everywhere else on both sides of the ball. So Tennessee is the only one that really has a lot of defensive pieces, a quarterback, offensive line for sure. They have, maybe the best bookend tackles in the league, and they're both super young players. And then now you add in the skill level, the skill players that we're going to talk about today. They're certainly headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and they, going into the first night of the draft, they had 2 first-round picks, and, so I'm sure they were thinking about trading, but they got to the point where, it didn't work out, and they got really good players. But they wanted to get playmakers, they said, playmakers on offense and defense, and I think they certainly did that, but we'll get to those players here in a second. They also, they talked about, and I know that you've mentioned this before and talked about this before, as far as how they structure their board. John Robinson said, we don't really talk in terms of rounds. It's like we talking more about role and value. And so I know that you basically instantly started thinking about tiers and things like that. So, how do you view their system?
I think it makes perfect sense. They also mentioned, to get a little deeper, how the fact that you could trade compensatory picks this year, finally, how that affected them, because that's a whole lot of extra picks involved with that, and that really takes away from the round perspective. But you look at like the old trade value charts, yes, they show you by round, but really those are by pick number. So those are already structured that way. That's how they operated, and I think it makes sense, especially because essentially what they're saying they did is they would look at specific traits, certainly what they had, what they don't have on their team, but then they would prioritize those specific traits. And that's how they would decide, well, players worth this tier or that tier. And you can see in what they did with their board. So, real quick overview. Obviously, Corey Davis is Corey Davis. We'll get into him. Adoree Jackson adds, I'm sure, extra benefit to him because not only can they potentially play him on offense, but certainly dynamic returner. Taywan Taylor, slot guy, Jonnu Smith, all-around tight end. Jayon Brown, that's the interesting one, because you and I were on him very, very early as a coverage linebacker, something that is so pivotal in today's NFL game. And clearly, they traded up for him, so they really valued him. I'm sure he was up just to get away from the tiers, just because it's hard to define where they found him at. But when you think about the draft board in terms of rounds, if you're valuing a guy as a 3rd round pick, or you're taking a guy in the 3rd round, you view him as a starter. That's just the way it is. So the fact that they traded up in the 4th round for him shows you that, hey, he was a high tier, that they really valued that skill set as a coverage guy. That's important. That's important enough to basically qualify him as a starter, whether he's actually starting or not. That's the value he brings, is that of a starter.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, so they, when you talk about tiers, people do it differently, but so basically they would like starters, and then what do you have, like, I've seen some teams have them at like multiple tiers of like, developmental, backup, role player, these things. But yeah, like you mentioned, they must have seen something that they really liked.
That's very much a pro personnel approach that I've always seen is you have the rounds for college and then pros. I know a lot of teams have historically done where for their pro scouting, especially, they'll use a lot in free agency and their self scouting, where they'll evaluate guys in terms of, a Pro Bowler, a solid starter, a backup, guys that they can develop into that, special teamers they can develop, and then obviously you get all the way down to reject grades or replace, or basically guys that are below replacement level that you're looking at too. But yeah, there's some of that involved too, and I think it makes sense to merge the two and to always look in that capacity.
They were a team that they feel consistent college production will translate to the NFL, so they're really keeping an eye on that, and it's hard to argue with them.
Well, that is PFF, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say it's basically what we do. one thing that was stood out, because, some teams try to hide their interest. They did not hide their interest, Josh. They spent time visiting and working out every single player they drafted. So, if you do pay attention to those, workout news ticker items, and you're a Titans fan, definitely keep in mind, because they're drafting those players. One thing, again, that stood out that I thought was different with them compared to some of the other schools is how willing they are, at least since John Robinson's been there, Josh, to take people from not necessarily football powerhouses.
Yeah, they have 5 non-Power 5 draft picks this year?
Yeah.
And they had another 4 or 5 last year?
Yeah.
I mean, that's 9 picks in 2 years. I mean, there are teams that don't have 9 picks in 2 years, and they spent 9 the last 2 years on non-Power 5 guys. So they're looking for him everywhere. They're not as afraid of competition level. I mean, obviously you get a guy like Corey Davis, that's an obvious one, but still, I mean, you have a number of different players that aren't necessarily playing at the highest level that they are not willing to, though they are willing to pull the trigger on. That says something about their approach for sure.
Yeah, and they went FCS, at least once this year and last year.
Yep.
So again, something to keep an eye on. So that I think the Titans are definitely not afraid to go small school. All right, so let's get into the players that they took specifically. Corey Davis. Woo, man, Corey Davis is fun to watch. I remember that I was doing I remember the first time I saw him, I had never heard of him, and I was doing a Western Michigan games, doing analysis, and he caught a screen pass, and then just what he did afterwards, I basically had to instantly send a message to Steve Palazzolo, our director of college scouting. I was like, oh my goodness, this guy at Western Michigan can play. He is such a beast after the catch with his running ability and his size and his speed. And I mean, there's just you're in that neck of the woods. What do you like about Davis?
He's got some Anquan Bolden in him, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does at times.
Yeah, because athletically, I think he's plenty good enough. I'm sure he's faster than what Bolden ran coming out of Florida State, but he's not a 4.3 guy. There's no question about that. But his all-around ball skills, his route running ability, his competitiveness after the catch, his toughness, all that to me screams Anquan Bolden. And you've talked about quite a bit how maybe he benefited from the fact that he was hurt and couldn't run. Again, I'm not saying he's running a 4.72 like Anquan Bolden did at his combine, which dropped him down to the second round, but maybe he benefited from not having to run in the high 4.5s, presumably somewhere around there, to where he still ended up being a top 10 pick. Where in past years, if a guy runs at that speed, he's probably not getting drafted that high. But man, you just look at everything he does. We haven't even mentioned his blocking. Very competitive blocker too. So. Yeah. I mean, and
they like that. They mentioned that. They mentioned good blocker.
Yeah.
Again, they mentioned what he does with the ball in his hands, his route running, as you mentioned. They, we keep harping on the V word, versatility, because everyone's talking about that. And this is a guy that they view as a versatile player, Josh.
Yeah, there's no question about that. One other thing I want to point out too, you talked about draft strategy and them looking as a clear trade back candidate from where they were, especially anytime you have a team that has 2 picks in the first round, especially this year when it's such a deep draft. You really do have an opportunity to trade back, accumulate more picks, maybe for the future, maybe for draft day, somewhere down the line. But they opted to stay put. I think when you look at how the first round of the draft shook down, in particular that top 10 with all those offensive skill players going before the defenders went, I think they did the right thing and staying put at number 5. They made sure they got the top wide receiver in the draft. There's no guarantee they were going to get him even a couple picks later. And I mean, by pick 12, all the top offensive players, they were gone because they went before the defenders did, even though it's a better class defensively than offensive.
Yeah,
so
you're right.
I think they were right to hang back to stay where they were up at 5 and just take their guy.
Yeah, I think you're right, Josh. I think they had the opportunity to trade back, especially when you're sitting there with 2 first-round picks, but they didn't. They decided to stay put and take Dory Jackson, which was, to some people, it was a little interesting that he went there. But when you think about, because he did have some coverage, mishaps and things like that. But again, talented player, talented athlete. Again, a playmaker. They view him as someone who can play outside, corner, or inside in the slot, in addition to the punt returner, kick returner stuff. So, again, Josh, as you mentioned, they could have traded back, but they even specifically said basically that, they had a decent offer, but they didn't want to pass on Dory.
And I think ultimately that's a position that doesn't come in to the league guns a-blazing. So when you have a guy like Dory Jackson that's such a dynamic returner, you're getting immediate return on your investment, at least in that capacity. So maybe in some concerns, even though we love this cornerback class, and there were a lot of other guys that we probably would have taken ahead of them, at least me personally, I would have. I know you're a West Coast bias guy heavily.
What?
But that being said, a lot of them were West Coast guys. But all that aside, I think you are going to get an instant return on your investment. So they got that going for them, which is nice.
Yeah, and I think that they also said they might get him some snaps on offense, which I don't blame him, because he is
that'll be interesting,
dynamic with the ball in his hands. So yeah, I think he'll be able to because he's such a talented world-class athlete, basically, I think he'll be able to clean up that technique stuff, for a corner. But again, they really liked his instincts. They thought he had good ball skills. And again, all the other things that he brings. All right, Josh, they had no second round pick. And then they went with, Taywan Taylor there in the third. Or is it Taywan? Is it Taywan?
I believe it's Taywan.
I think it's Taywan. So yeah, again, it's a guy that, like Davis, and how Corey Davis, they said that they thought that Davis could play outside, and inside. They think Taylor can as well, but they think that they'll probably just start him off inside and then possibly move him outside. So again, it goes back to, that versatility and what you had mentioned him as far as putting weapons around Mariota.
Yeah, and I think, what I just mentioned with the Dory Jackson, the ability to get immediate return on your investment. I didn't mention this with Corey Davis, with the comment about them wanting to put him outside to start with. Eventually, they'll work him in as a slot guy as well, so he's doing both. Taylor, they're doing the opposite. Basically, I think what they're saying is they're going to try and do is let them learn and master one position first and then figure the rest of it out later. That way, like I said, they'll get immediate return on all three investments in some capacity, and then they can work in and become the complete players they obviously project all of them to be. And I think when you look at what Taywan Taylor has done throughout preseason, he's been very impressive. He's gotten a chance to play a little bit more because Tajay Sharp, didn't he just come off PUP like yesterday? I think he's just become available. So Taywan Taylor was getting some extra snaps, playing quite a bit in the slot, and I thought he was very impressive. So that certainly helped accelerate his development a little bit. But there's a lot to like about him in terms of just his explosiveness as an interior weapon, and just all around skill set. Fun player to watch at Western Kentucky, and I think they might be onto something there with him.
They went from Western Kentucky to Florida International with their next pick. Jonnu Smith, tight end. They didn't meet with him at the Senior Bowl, and he was in for a facility visit. Like I said, they've been pretty active with making sure they meet with these players. Now, they were very sort of adamant about the fact that they thought that Jonnu had been portrayed as mostly just a move tight end, and they said that they think that he's more than just a move tight end, which, I guess makes sense, especially since they invested pretty significant capital in him, don't you think?
Yeah, it does. And you think about their current stud tight end. He's only 6'1", 235, but he's one of the better blocking tight ends in the league. Now, obviously, he's been over 100 targets the last couple of years. But, he's already gone on record saying Jonnu Smith is, he's definitely the heir apparent to me. So it's not surprising that they're not afraid of his size or perceived lack of skills. We talked about it with who do we talk about it with Mark Andrews? how just because he didn't line up in line doesn't mean he can't play in line. And so we'll see how much Jonnu gets on the field this year. I have a feeling by the way they've talked about him, by his usage in preseason, it's going to be quite a bit. But we'll see if it's kind of like some of the other picks that we've talked about. If maybe for this year, for the most part, it's not in line, and it is more from the slot or flex or just in general as more of a receiving weapon than blocker. But they're not afraid of making him an all-around player as well, and I think we'll see that down the line.
All right, the next player they took, we sort of hit on earlier, was Jayon Brown, linebacker from UCLA. You know, he was a guy who really stood out in our system early, Josh. You remember, like, all those tackles that he had? You know, we would look at his tackle numbers and be like, wow. And then his tackle numbers, popped up on tape. And then when we plopped on the film to watch him, the coverage range was really impressive. Really impressive. And I think I agree with you, Josh. I think that they saw a role, for him, I think, and then especially in their sub defense, and that's why they traded up to go get him.
Yeah, I remember talking to people around him at the combine, and just as I was about to ask if there's any chance he might play a safety because he's a little undersized, they're talking about, well, they hope he can run in the 4.6s. Like, he's not this great athlete, because he doesn't show that on film at all. On film, he looks like an excellent athlete. He looks like a safety playing linebacker in terms of his coverage instincts, his athleticism on the field. So maybe that doesn't translate to the underwear Olympics, but I think looking at him on film, he's exactly what the modern day NFL needs in terms of coverage ability from the linebacker position, which, again, we talked about. That just really increases his value of what he brings to that team. And that's something that they really didn't have in the past, and they needed to get in this draft. And I thought they got one of the absolute best at that specific role. Yeah,
they said they see him in sub defense initially, and that he possibly could carve out a role in the base defense down the road. But I mean, he just made a really nice play in coverage the other day, Josh. You see that ball that he tipped up in the air that got picked off? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things, too. Steve talks about this with defensive linemen or edge rushers, how there's specific traits you may have that it may not be the sexy trait, but if you have this one, you can learn the others. And in particular with defensive linemen, it's the ability to play the run and then learning how to pass rush. And that's something we've always said with Danielle Hunter in Minnesota. And who knows, maybe it's the same with off-ball linebackers as well. You don't think about them as coverage defenders, but if he can learn that end, if he's got that end figured out, he can learn how to play the run too. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something that holds true with Jayon Brown, if he does end up developing into a starter because he has that skill set. And maybe that's something we need to watch in the future as evaluators, as a trend going forward.
And we're definitely Team Jayon.
Yes.
They also, thought that he could be, as you mentioned, the immediate return investment. And you mentioned his athleticism. They really think that sort of stuff will factor in as far as they think he's going to be a really good special teams player. As far as kickoff coverage and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean they're definitely going to get some return from him immediately. All right, next, Josh, they went out and they took Corey Levin, a guard, possibly plays center. So I guess it's some inside flex there, private workout. Next player they took was Josh Caraway, played defensive end in college, but sort of an undersized tweener guy. So that projects to outside backer in, LeBeau's scheme. Next, they took Brad Seaton. They said very large man, a big guy with a long reach, and he could play both tackle spots. I didn't really see much about Brad Seaton at all during the year. Did you? He's, I guess, one of their small school guys. And then Khalfani Muhammad, was, undersized running back from Cal. He tested as far as in our numbers go, Josh, he was really high in the breakaway percentage. I don't know if you remember that, but yeah, that type of impact from him.
Again, a special teamer.
Yeah. And, and they even said, change of pace, speed type back who got the ball really well. But you're right. He's probably kickoff and cover returns and the speed guy that you're getting late in the draft. So, that's why they did that. But all right, Josh. So then forecasting them forward, It's got to be. Don't you think they got to start spending some considerable draft capital on like the defense?
Yeah, and in particular, edge rush. I think that's the place to go. Look, it's interesting. You look at the way they structured that team. They got their quarterback. Obviously, they had their left tackle the year prior to that. So last year, they took the right tackle up high. So now they've protected their quarterback. Now they've given him weapons. They got the running back last year. Obviously, they spent a free agent, not a good running back last year as well. This year, they have multiple wide receivers, another tight end to already add to Delaney Walker there, who we talked about. So now they have weapons there. So what's the presumption there? The presumption is you have everything you need on that offense to be a highly potent offense to put points on the board. Well, if you're putting points on the board on offense, you're going to be playing with the lead. So the next step is to get the pass rusher, because if you're playing with the lead, teams are going to have to pass against you. So you better be able to rush the passer. And I think they're lacking some legitimate long-term options there on the edge rush. So I would think going forward, that would be something they'd want to get, especially pairing next to Jarrell Casey, one of my favorite players to watch in the NFL. They're one of their interior defensive linemen. Focusing on edge rusher with a high pick next year. Again, we like them a lot. I don't think their first-round pick is going to be too high, but I think there's still going to be some options there on the edge for them to take in the first round.
Yeah, because there's going to be some good edge guys, and when you look at their draft history, the only real pass rusher they've taken high in the last few drafts was Kevin Dodd, who they took at 33 overall.
Yeah,
they get a lot of their production from free agents and things like that. So, I agree, Josh. I think they have to go pass rusher high soon, and then again, the one thing that's going to help them out, it will be the fact that a lot of the pass rush in LeBeau's scheme is generated by the outside backers. So the player they draft won't have to be as physically large of a person as like a Myles Garrett or something like that. Is right. Basically what I'm alluding to. The fact that you mentioned that they probably will be good. They'll probably have a little bit later pick, and I think that will help them. The fact that they can draft a little bit smaller of a pass rusher. But again, Josh and I think they'll be taking a pass rusher early in the upcoming draft. All right, Josh, let's move on to the rookie review and talk about how these rookies have been playing thus far, which is always exciting for you and I because we're draft nerds and we love the rookies. So, all right, again, the quarterbacks, some of them still continue to stand out. I think Pat Mahomes is still playing really, really well, but moving on outside of the obvious sort of first round people, Josh, who really who stood out to us out of the rookies?
Yeah, Deion Dawkins in Buffalo has played really well. They have a hole at right tackle, and it's looking like he probably has a chance to play inside there. So he's looked pretty good there. 94.7 run blocking grade this past weekend. That led all tackles. Got to improve in pass pro, but he has to beat Jordan Mills out. And let's be honest, that's been something Jordan Mills has struggled with mightily. I think there's a pretty good chance he could end up being their starting right tackle going forward. How about Dan Feeney? I graded that game.
That game was terrible. We shouldn't even we should warn people before we talk about that game.
I know. That game was just an absolute dumpster fire. Just such a mess. Neither starting quarterback played.
Carry on.
I hate going back to this game, but Dan Feeney had such a unique game. He played almost 50-50 in snaps at center and right guard. I want to say he played even a little bit of left guard in that game, but regardless, so he split time between there, and there were times where he looked awesome. He had a couple of pancake blocks on run blocks, and then he had one or two where he got pancaked himself. And then he kicked in the center and had a couple of awful back-to-back snaps. First off, he snapped one over Cardale Jones's quarterback's head.
Oh, I remember that.
Cardale jumps up, he gets the snap, so no fumble, avoids that. And then Cardale immediately throws it out and throws a wiffle ball out into the flat that should have been picked off for a walk-in touchdown, but was dropped by the defensive back. The very next snap, Feeney gets beat off the snap, and which obviously he played almost exclusively right guard. And he played a little bit of right tackle last year at Indiana, but almost exclusively at right guard. So center's brand new for him. Not used to getting off the snap. He's blown off the snap and ends up just tackling his man for a bad penalty that he took down there. Again, it was deep in their own end. So kind of an adventure for him. A lot of good, a lot of bad. But he's going to be a very, very important piece for San Diego, especially considering the unfortunate loss of Forrest Lamp, their other second-round pick and an interior lineman that they drafted this past season.
Yeah, I was watching that game, and I just thought that Cardale should press charges against the Chargers, backup offensive line, because he got.
Is that why they're called the Chargers?
He got abused, man. Like, that was disgusting to watch.
Yeah.
He just kept getting hit. Anyways, gross game.
I don't remember how many sacks he took. There were several, and maybe one or two of them were on him because his internal clock was non-existent. But there must have been 9-10 sacks.
It was bad
against San Diego that game. It was not pretty at all.
Yeah. All right, moving on off that game because I'm disgusted. Cordrea Tankersley's been playing pretty good for
much more exciting.
The Dolphins. Yeah, 88 overall grade thus far on 55 snaps. So he's got the second he's second highest overall grade among corners last week.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I saw from him is exactly what I loved with him in Clemson. His aggressiveness, his physicality, his competitiveness in man coverage. He wrestled an interception away from a wide receiver. Just a phenomenal play. And that's kind of exactly what he was at Clemson. He's a guy that one-on-one matchup, he's going to do everything he can to win. And that, to me, translates well. Obviously, it's translating well so far with his grades. And, I really like him. And I think Miami struck gold with this pick here. I love Cordrea Tankersley, and he's shown nothing so far in preseason to make me think different of my high evaluation of him coming out.
He was targeted 3 times in coverage and only allowed 1 catch for a total of 5 yards and picked off a pass. So really impressive. The next guy we should hit on, Josh, was a PFF favorite, especially among some of our analysts, and that's D.D. Westbrook.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting scenario. You and I talked about when we were prepping for this yesterday.
How good
obviously, how good he was, how good he's been. Quarterback has a 118.8 rating when throwing into his coverage, which is saying something because their quarterbacks are not good. So if they're going to be that good throwing to him, they might want to throw to him quite a bit more. 7.71 yards per route run last week. Obviously, the sample sizes are small, but still, he's been excellent throughout. And it really leads to an interesting scenario with those wide receivers. This is what we were discussing yesterday, Jordan, and it's come to fruition a little bit today. Kind of hinted that this might be coming down the line. But obviously, they have Allen Robinson. You expect a bounce-back year from him regardless of quarterback play. He's just too good of a player. You look at what happened down the stretch last year. Marquise Lee finally took on a bigger role, finally stayed healthy, and he was playing really well down the stretch. Hasn't been on the field yet this preseason, but I think he just got cleared, so you expect some things out of him. Then you add D.D. Westbrook to the mix, so the question becomes what to do with Allen Hurns. I'm not sure there's a place for him on his current roster, and from what we're hearing from there's some rumblings that some of the beat writers there think that there's a chance they could be shopping Allen Hurns, and that makes total sense with what we've seen in preseason so far from D.D. Westbrook and what we know they already have in Marquise Lee and Allen Robinson. So that's something to watch the next week or so as rosters get finalized, if maybe Jacksonville is able to move Allen Hurns and get some capital for next year.
Yeah, talented rookies upsetting rosters.
Or maybe there's a quarterback somewhere that, obviously they're not going to get a true starting quarterback, but that situation's such a mess. They could go a number of different routes, and Hurns could end up being there as part of that. Who knows? But Buffalo never seemed convinced with Tyrod. Who knows? Maybe Hurns is part of that deal and a decent pick to get Tyrod out of Buffalo and into Jacksonville. Suddenly Jacksonville becomes a very interesting team if they have a guy like Tyrod Taylor under center.
Wow, you're really going out there with this right now.
I am on my jump to conclusions, Matt. I'm all over it. You comp everyone to Jerry Rice and Jason Kelsey, and I'll create the most absurd trade possible just to try and get a quarterback in Jacksonville.
Okay. All right. So in the AFC South, another rookie who stood out last week was running back Marlon Mack from the Colts. He had an 87 overall grade on only 16 snaps, Josh. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and when you think about that position in Indianapolis, they still have Frank Gore there. He's 104. He only has one leg. He had to amputate it in the war, but he's still playing on that one leg. And they need some youth at that position. In particular, when you have a guy like Andrew Luck, you need a guy that's going to catch the ball out of the backfield, that's going to, be a nice utility weapon for him, a nice blankie when that poor offensive line breaks down. So having a guy like Marlon Mack step up in preseason like he has, very small sample size, 548.6 elusive rating, that's good. Basically, I think he broke 5 missed tackles last week, he broke 5 tackles last week on, again, like you said, a very limited number of touches. Small sample size to be talking about exactly what his elusive rating is, but when you make that many guys miss and you're in a team like Indianapolis that does what they do on offense, that's very encouraging that we could see a lot more out of him in the future.
Yeah, and the next player to discuss is Michael Roberts from Toledo, and now the tight end for the Lions. 85.8 overall grade. He caught both of his targets for 29 yards, Josh, and he forced a missed tackle. But he also, played an all-around game there on his 29 snaps.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important part about him, too, and I think that's exactly why they drafted him. We mentioned Eric Ebron, what he is, what he isn't earlier when we were talking about Penn State's Gesicki. I think Roberts allows them to flex Ebron out, to keep him away from those blocking situations where he just does not excel at. That puts Ebron in a better position to succeed, and it allows the offense to kind of retain or regain some continuity if Roberts is able to block like he's been able to do. Led all tight ends this past week with an 84.2 run blocking grade. So excellent effort there. Needs to hold on to the ball better. He's had some ball security issues, both in terms of fumbling and catching the ball. He's got to improve those, but if he can run block, there's definitely going to be a big role for him this year in Detroit.
All right, staying in the NFC North, they're going to go to the Minnesota Vikings, getting some good quality play out of defensive interior lineman Jaleel Johnson from your Big 12.
Yeah, I love Jaleel Johnson in Iowa. I thought he was one of the more natural 3-techs in terms of his ability to explode off the snap, beat blockers off the ball, penetrate the backfield. That was something he did consistently throughout the year last year, and then he shows up at the Combine. Runs a 5.5. He just looks overweight and sloppy, and you really question, was I seeing what I thought I saw in film, or was it because Big Ten's just slow and they don't have good linemen? What's going on there? So I'm glad to see him doing well to start off the season, because I think he could be a really, really good player for them. 5 run stops this past week. That's outstanding, especially for an interior lineman in limited snaps. That's really absurd if you think about it, because how many tackles do interior defensive linemen normally get in a week? In a limited 30 snaps total, he had five run stops. That's really absurd.
Yeah. Nobody else had at that position even had 4.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So, yeah, very impressive. All right. And then the last player we want to hit on, Josh, is, not all the quarterbacks are the first round and second round guys that are performing well right now. One of the Buffalo Bills have been getting some quality play out of rookie Nathan Peterman.
Oh, so you're saying Tyrod Taylor could go elsewhere because they have somebody, right?
What? Did you go back to your crazy Tyrod Taylor to Jacksonville conspiracy trade theory?
I did. I did.
Well, I mean, yeah, if Peterman has played well thus far, but mostly with a clean pocket, and it has been preseason, but he has kind of struggled with pressure. So it's not necessarily saying they're going to get Tyrod to Jacksonville right away, Josh, but, there's been some good things there from Peterman.
One thing I will say on that before touching on Peterman's play, let's watch their snap usage this week. Normally, this is the week where you see the majority of the reps taken by the starter. If for some reason Tyrod, doesn't go or only gets a couple of series, maybe they are thinking about, we need to keep him healthy because he might be on the move, and we need to get Peterman more reps. So that's something to watch out for. I don't anticipate my crazy scenario happening, and I think we'll probably see Tyrod quite a bit. Something to keep in mind as far as that goes. Passing under pressure, that's been an issue for him so far. 39.6 passer rating when under pressure, but when he has a clean pocket, 114.8. So that's been really outstanding, and obviously we want to see him progress further. That offensive line's been a little hit or miss the last couple of years, at least in pass pro. They've obviously done a lot in terms of being able to run block, but in terms of pass pro, it hasn't been great. So he's got to be able to perform better when under pressure, but encouraging things so far that we've seen from him.
All right, Josh, we are out of here, buddy. We'll be back next week. We're going to talk, since we already did all the positions, we're going to talk breakout players. That sound fun?
That does sound fun.
That response was not fun.
I might show off for that. No.
Anyways, we're going to talk breakout players, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And then, so many games. There are already games. So, Josh and I have plenty of rookies and prospects to keep an eye on and tell you about. Please go to ProFootballFocus.com and subscribe to either PFF Edge or PFF Elite to get your draft guide so you can follow along with all the cool kids. Please go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and review with your email address or Twitter handle so you could be eligible to win a subscription to PFF Elite. Josh, anything you want to say on the way out?
Enjoy live games that count. Live games that count this weekend. It might be Stanford against Rice, USF against San Jose State. I don't care. They count. They mean something. I'm really looking forward to Saturday, man. I can't wait.
Woo-hoo. All right. We'll talk to you guys next week.